The ancient Egyptians believed that every morning, the sun god Ra had to die and be reborn to bring light to the world. What they understood, and what we've completely forgotten, is that death and rebirth aren't events that happen once in a lifetime. They're meant to happen every single day, every moment, every breath. But here's what nobody tells you about 2026. The numbers changing on your calendar right now aren't just marking time passing. They're announcing the arrival of your personal death and resurrection ceremony, whether you realize it or not. Every culture that ever thrived understood this secret. They knew that certain moments in time crack open like cosmic eggs. And if you know how to step through those cracks, you don't just change your life. You change who you fundamentally are. The Maya calculated these moments with mathematical precision. The Greeks built entire mystery schools around them. The Hindus encoded them into sacred festivals that lasted for days. And right now, as 2025 dissolves into 2026, one of these cracks is opening directly in front of you. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. The question is whether you'll recognize this moment for what it truly is. Your invitation to stop being who you've been and start becoming who you're meant to be. Most people will miss it entirely, sleepwalking through this transition like they sleepwalk through their entire lives. They'll make resolutions they'll forget by February, set goals that feel empty by March, and by next December they'll wonder where another year of their life disappeared to. But if you're here right now, listening to these words, something different is stirring in you. Something ancient is awakening. Something that remembers what it feels like to be truly alive. There was a Romanian scholar named Mircea Eliade who spent his entire life studying why some people seem to live in a completely different reality than others. Not a better reality, a fundamentally different one, where time itself worked differently, where ordinary events became doorways to the extraordinary, where the same 365 days that trapped most people in cycles of monotony became springboards for experiences so profound they could rewrite the very core of a person's being. What Eliade discovered will sound impossible until you understand how it works. He found that throughout history, in every culture on Earth, there were people who had learned to live in what he called sacred time. Not clock time, not calendar time, sacred time. A dimension of experience where a single moment could contain eternity, where an ordinary Tuesday could become more transformative than years of therapy, where the transition from one year to the next could literally function as a death and rebirth ceremony that rewrote your DNA at the level of consciousness itself. These weren't mystics hiding in caves. These were ordinary people who had discovered the secret technology that every ancient civilization knew, but that our modern world has completely forgotten. Picture this: an ancient Babylonian priest standing at the temple at midnight on New Year's Eve, not to watch fireworks or drink champagne, but to perform a ritual that would literally kill his old self and birth a new one. Not symbolically, not metaphorically. In his lived experience, in his consciousness, in his very identity, the person who walked into that temple was not the same person who would walk out 12 hours later. The ritual was called Akitu, and it lasted for 11 days. For 11 days, the king would abdicate his throne, the people would confess their failures, the priests would reenact the cosmic battle between order and chaos, and by the end, the entire civilization would be spiritually reborn. They understood something we've forgotten, that consciousness itself has the power to step outside of linear time and into eternal time, where real transformation doesn't just happen, it's inevitable. Every moment of genuine spiritual awakening that you've ever experienced, every time you felt truly connected to something larger than yourself, every instant when life suddenly made perfect sense and you felt completely alive, you were experiencing sacred time. You were touching the same dimension of reality that these ancient peoples built their entire lives around. You know what touches me most when I read your messages? It's realizing that we're not alone in this search. If you're listening to me now and feel that emptiness, that sensation that something important is missing in your life, I want you to know that I understand exactly what you're going through. There were moments when I also felt completely disconnected from the sacred, lost in the midst of a routine that seemed to suck all the magic out of existence. That's why I want to ask you a very direct question. What was the last moment you felt there was something greater than yourself present in your life? It could have been contemplating a sunset, listening to music, or simply in an instant of silence. If you feel comfortable, write in the comments, "I miss the sacred in my daily life," and briefly tell when that last moment was. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to read today to feel less alone in this journey. And I promise I'll read each comment with the care it deserves. But here's where it gets revolutionary. Eliade discovered that this capacity for sacred time, this ability to experience genuine rebirth, isn't something that requires years of training or special circumstances or perfect conditions. It's hardwired into human consciousness itself. Every person carries within them what he called the homo religiosus, the sacred human being, the part of you that naturally recognizes transcendent moments and instinctively knows how to transform ordinary experience into extraordinary experience. The reason you feel so empty, so disconnected, so trapped in meaningless repetition isn't because you've lost this capacity. It's because modern life has created such a thick cocoon of distraction and noise that you can't hear your own sacred nature calling out to you anymore. But the moment you learn to recognize these calls, the moment you understand that every transition, every ending, every beginning is a potential doorway into sacred time, everything changes. Let me tell you about the most powerful moment of my own life. The moment when everything Eliade had written suddenly clicked into place, not as intellectual theory, but as lived reality. I was going through what most people would call a mental breakdown, but what I now understand was actually a spiritual breakthrough disguised as a crisis. Everything I thought I knew about myself, everything I thought I wanted, every identity I had carefully constructed over decades was crumbling. I felt like I was dying, and in a very real sense, I was. But instead of fighting it, instead of trying to hold on to the familiar, something inside me remembered this ancient wisdom. I began to see my crisis not as a problem to be solved, but as an initiation to be embraced. I realized that what felt like the end of my world was actually the beginning of my rebirth into a completely different kind of existence. The same external circumstances that had felt like prison bars suddenly became doorways. The same relationships that had felt suffocating suddenly became mirrors, reflecting back my own transformation. The same daily routines that had felt meaningless suddenly became sacred practices connecting me to something infinitely larger than my small personal concerns. If you want to give this video a like, this would be a perfect moment to do it, because what I'm about to share with you is the exact process that transformed my breakdown into breakthrough, and it's the same process that can transform your transition into 2026 from just another year, passing into the most profound spiritual initiation of your life. Every wisdom tradition on earth has understood that crisis and transformation are not opposites but dance partners, that every genuine spiritual awakening begins with what feels like death but ends with rebirth into a larger version of yourself. The Celtic tradition called these moments thin places, where the boundary between ordinary reality and sacred reality becomes so transparent you can step from one into the other simply by shifting your awareness. The Sufi tradition called them fana, moments of ego death that open the door to baka, eternal life lived through divine consciousness. The Christian mystics called them dark nights of the soul that precede the dawn of union with the divine. Different words, different cultural expressions, but always the same essential process: death of the false self, journey through the unknown, rebirth into authentic being. What Eliade discovered was that this process doesn't require years of preparation or perfect spiritual conditions. It requires only three things that every human being already possesses: the willingness to let go of who you think you're supposed to be, the courage to face the unknown without trying to control it, and the recognition that your deepest crisis is actually your greatest invitation to transformation. The ancient Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred spiritual tradition in the entire Greek civilization, lasted only 3 days, but people who went through them were never the same again. They had experienced death and resurrection not as abstract concepts, but as immediate, undeniable reality. They knew beyond any doubt that consciousness itself is eternal, that their true identity transcends any temporary form it inhabits, that what they had mistaken for solid reality was actually just one layer of an infinite multidimensional existence. And here's the most revolutionary part. They achieved this transformation not by escaping the world, but by seeing the world through completely different eyes. Now imagine applying this same transformative power to your transition into 2026. Instead of seeing it as just another year beginning, what if you approached it as your personal Akitu ritual, your Eleusinian mystery, your Celtic thin place moment? What if you understood that the very dissatisfaction you're feeling with your current life, the very emptiness that brought you to this video, The very longing for something more meaningful than endless consumption and distraction is actually your soul's way of preparing you for initiation into a completely different way of being. Alive? What if the crisis you're experiencing isn't a sign that something is wrong with you, but a sign that something is trying to be born through you? What if your depression isn't a disease to be medicated away, but a cocoon stage preparing you for metamorphosis into your authentic self? What if your anxiety isn't a disorder to be eliminated, but sacred energy that's been misdirected away from its true purpose of awakening you to deeper levels of reality? This is where Eliade's insight becomes truly revolutionary for modern life. He showed us that the yearning you feel, the sense that something essential is missing, the intuition that you're capable of so much more than you're currently expressing, is not a personal problem, but a spiritual calling. It's your homo religiosus, your sacred self, trying to wake up from the hypnotic trance of consumer culture and remember what it feels like to live as a fully conscious human being. Every moment of boredom is actually a moment of spiritual hunger. Every feeling of meaninglessness is actually meaning trying to be born. Every experience of emptiness is actually fullness waiting to be recognized. Every sense of disconnection is actually connection calling out to be restored. But here's the key that most people miss. This transformation doesn't happen by adding something new to your life. It happens by seeing what's already there through completely different eyes. The Zen tradition has a saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The activities remain the same. The consciousness engaging in those activities becomes totally different. The ancient Egyptians understood this when they developed their concept of Mayat, divine order that could transform every ordinary action into a sacred offering. The Hindus understood this when they taught that any work performed as devotion becomes yoga, union with the divine. The Taoists understood this when they showed how every movement, every breath, every interaction could become an expression of the underlying harmony that governs the entire universe. You don't need to retreat from the world to find the sacred. You need to discover the sacred that's been hiding in plain sight within the world you're already living in. So here's your invitation. Here's your initiation. Here's your doorway into 2026 as a year of sacred transformation rather than another cycle of empty repetition. Tonight, before you sleep, before you scroll through social media, before you distract yourself with anything else, sit quietly for just a few minutes and ask yourself this question. Who would I be if I weren't afraid? Not who would I do? Not what would I accomplish? Not what would I achieve? But who would I be? What qualities would emerge? What gifts would I share? What love would I express? How would I move through the world if I truly trusted that I am held by the same cosmic intelligence that spins galaxies and grows flowers and beats your heart without you having to think about it? Feel that person, that possibility, that potential self stirring within you right now. That's not fantasy. That's not wishful thinking. That's your authentic being calling out to you across the artificial boundaries of linear time, reminding you that transformation is not only possible but inevitable when you align yourself with the sacred rhythms that govern all existence. Every sunrise is a death and rebirth ceremony. Every full moon is an initiation into deeper understanding. Every season that changes is a teaching about letting go and beginning again. Every breath you take is a participation in the cosmic dance of expansion and contraction that keeps the entire universe alive. 2026 is not going to be just another year. It's going to be your year of remembering who you've always been beneath all the roles and masks and identities you've accumulated. It's going to be your year of discovering that the sacred you've been searching for everywhere else has been waiting patiently inside you all along. It's going to be your year of understanding that you don't need permission to be magnificent. You don't need credentials to be wise. You don't need anyone else's approval to live as the radiant, powerful, infinitely creative being you came here to be. The ancient mystery schools taught their initiates a secret that every wisdom tradition has preserved in different forms across thousands of years. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. And every moment, including this one, including the transition into 2026, is an opportunity to remember this truth and live from it, rather than from the small, fearful, limited identity that the world has convinced you is all you are. This remembering is not something that might happen someday if you're lucky, or if you work hard enough, or if the conditions are perfect. This remembering is available right now, in this moment, through the simple but revolutionary act of recognizing that consciousness itself is sacred. that awareness itself is divine, that the very fact that you can observe your thoughts and feelings and experiences means you are something infinitely larger than any thought or feeling or experience you could ever have. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes that there's a different path, a deeper way to understand your own spiritual journey. I know what it's like to feel lost amid so much noise of the modern world, seeking answers that always seem to slip through your fingers. That's why I created this space, this refuge where we can explore together the ancient wisdom that still pulses alive in our hearts. When you subscribe to this channel, you're not just clicking a button, you're joining a community of people who, like you, feel that life has deeper layers waiting to be discovered. Here you'll find not just knowledge, but genuine embrace for your thirst for meaning. Subscribe now and be part of this journey of rediscovering the sacred in everyday life. Your soul deserves this gift. Remember this as you cross the threshold into 2026. Every ending contains the seed of a new beginning. Every death makes space for a resurrection. Every moment of letting go creates room for something even more beautiful to be born. You are not moving into just another year. You are moving into the next chapter of your own hero's journey, the next movement of your own sacred symphony, the next breath of your own eternal becoming. Trust the process. Trust the mystery. Trust the infinite intelligence that brought you to this moment, and trust that it knows exactly where it's taking you next. The universe doesn't make mistakes, and you being here, now, listening to these words, is no accident. Welcome to your rebirth. Welcome to your real life. Welcome to 2026 as the year you remember who you truly are.